Welcome back to Whispers in the Dark, where the night has a voice, and it knows your name. Turn down the lights, put on your headphones, and let's begin. The first thing you notice at night, when you're alone in a small supermarket, is how the building breathes. Not literally, of course. Not like lungs. But the place expands and contracts with temperature and emptiness, metal shelf brackets ticking as they cool, the long fluorescent lights giving off a thin electrical buzz, the refrigerators humming like they're dreaming. During the day, all that noise gets swallowed by people. Baskets rattling, kids whining, conversations, the constant little storm of normal life. At night, when the doors lock and the town goes quiet, the building takes its voice back. Sophie Price told herself it was just that. A building settling. A business doing what businesses do after hours. She kept telling herself that as she pulled her hoodie tighter and stood behind the counter, watching the minutes crawl across the small digital clock above the lottery display. 11:42 p.m. She worked here since she was 19. She knew every sound the place made. She knew the way the automatic doors sighed when they opened, the way the floor tiles clicked under certain shoes, the way the CCTV monitor sometimes flickered if you breathed wrong near the cable. She knew how the air smelled when the bakery case had been cleaned with lemon solution, and how the mop water always carried a faint sourness, no matter how many times you changed it. Tonight, everything felt off. Not because the store was different, but because she was. Normally, there were two of them. Always. That was policy. Two workers on closing shifts. One on tills, one stocking and cleaning, both within calling distance. That way, if someone came in drunk or angry or just strange, you weren't alone with them. That way, if you slipped on a spill in aisle 3, you didn't lie there until morning. But Jessa had called in sick at 6:30, voice thick and apologetic, fever, vomiting. "I can't stand up without the room spinning," she'd said. And Sophie had pictured her friend wrapped in blankets, shivering, eyes glassy. Sophie had been the only other person who could cover. Manager didn't pick up. District line went to voicemail. The answer, in the end, was the same answer the world always gave. We need you. Make it work. So here she was, alone. The town outside the windows looked like an old photograph left out in the rain. The streetlights cast pale cones across wet pavement. The glass storefront reflected the inside of the shop, like a second, stranger version of it, rows of shelves, receding into darkness, bright advertisements floating in the air. Sophie's own face pale, and doubled when she glanced up. A wind pushed at the building now and then. The door shivered in its frame. Sophie turned down the volume on the small television mounted in the corner near the customer service desk. She didn't like the way the news sounded in an empty store. Anchors were too calm about the end of the world. The headline strip at the bottom of the screen moved endlessly, like a mouth whispering. Local police urge caution. New details emerge. Public asked to remain vigilant. The anchor's face was the kind you saw on billboards. Smooth, practiced concern. Over her shoulder was a blurred image of police tape and flashing lights. Third victim in 2 weeks, the anchor said. Authorities believe the perpetrator may be traveling on foot and targeting small businesses during late hours. Residents are urged to avoid walking alone at night and to report any suspicious activity immediately. Sophie felt the hairs rise on her arms. She told herself it was the cold air from the refrigerators. She already knew the story. Everyone did. It had become a thing people talked about with the same fascination they used for storms. Terrible, inevitable, not happening to you until it did. A serial killer. That phrase felt like something out of a true crime podcast, too neat to be real. But the photos were real. The no names released was real. The warnings were real. And the detail that made Sophie's stomach twist every time she heard it. The killer didn't just kill. The killer took time. Sophie didn't listen for more. She muted the TV completely because the store had enough voices tonight. The coolers hummed, the lights buzzed, the building breathed. She looked down at the open ledger on the counter, the neat columns where she'd written sales totals. Her pen hovered over the paper, but the numbers blurred. She couldn't stop thinking about the back door. The staff door, really. The one that led to the alley. The one that was supposed to stay locked unless you were taking trash out. And then you locked it again right away. The one Jessa usually handled while Sophie watched the front. Sophie had taken out the last trash bag at 10:30 because the bin was overflowing. The alley had been empty, just a narrow channel between brick buildings, smelling of damp cardboard and old beer. She'd hurried, eyes darting, heart thumping, and had locked the door behind her so hard it rattled. She checked it again now, even though she was on the opposite end of the store. Her eyes flicked to the employees' only door in the distance, closed still. Then the automatic doors at the front made a sound. Not the opening sound, not the cheerful chime, something else. A soft, wet little squeak. Sophie froze, breath stuck. The doors didn't slide open. They didn't move at all. But the sound came again, like someone's finger dragging along the seam of glass. Sophie's pulse quickened. She lifted her head slowly, staring through the front windows at the dark sidewalk beyond. Nothing. Then, as if the store itself had decided to play a trick, the motion sensor triggered. The automatic doors slid open with their familiar sigh, and the cold night air poured in. A single figure stood just outside the threshold, not crossing in. Sophie's first thought, stupid and immediate, was, "We're open." Her second thought was, "We're almost closed." Her third thought didn't have words. It was just the animal part of her brain thrashing against her ribs. The figure didn't move. It stood perfectly still beneath the harsh storefront lights, as if it had been placed there. The person was tall, shoulders squared beneath a dark jacket. Their head was slightly bowed, as though reading something on the door. Sophie's mouth went dry. She forced herself to speak. "Hi," she called, voice thinner than she meant. "We close at midnight." The figure lifted its head. The person's face was in shadow from the hood, but Sophie saw enough to make her stomach tighten. Pale skin, a straight nose, and eyes that caught the light like coins at the bottom of a pond. The figure stepped forward, and the doors stayed open, holding their breath. The person walked in. The chime sounded, bright and cheerful, completely wrong. Sophie's training kicked in like a reflex. Customer service voice, neutral smile. "Evening," she said. "Just so you know, we're closing soon." The person paused near the end cap display of discounted chips. Their gaze traveled slowly over the store, taking in the aisles, the ceiling, the corners where shadows gathered. Their movements were unhurried, almost leisurely, as if time belonged to them. Soon, the person repeated. The voice was calm, not slurred, not loud, not aggressive, but it wasn't warm either. It sounded like someone reading from a script. Sophie swallowed. "Can I help you find something?" The person's eyes shifted to her. For a moment, Sophie felt pinned, like an insect held in place by a needle. "I'm just looking," the person said. Sophie nodded, though her neck felt stiff. She glanced at the CCTV monitor, where 4 grainy camera feeds showed different angles: the front doors, aisle 1, the back hallway, and the stockroom. In the top left feed, she saw the figure move deeper into the store, the hooded head turning. One customer, one worker. The policy didn't matter now. Sophie's hand slid under the counter, toward the small metal button taped beneath the register, an old panic button that sometimes worked, sometimes didn't. They'd tested it once, and the police had shown up 40 minutes later, irritated. Still, her fingers hovered there, ready. The hooded person walked down aisle 1, past the bread and cereal. Sophie watched on the monitor, eyes flicking between the feeds. The customer moved slowly, pausing now and then to look at products without reaching for them. Aisle 2, aisle 3. Sophie kept her smile fixed like a mask. Her mind ran through possibilities, trying to be fair. Maybe they're just weird. Maybe they're just browsing. Maybe they didn't realize how late it was. But the town wasn't busy at this hour, and the figure didn't have the jittery impatience of a last-minute shopper. There was no urgency, no list, no quick grabbing of essentials. There was inspection. Sophie tried to steady her breathing. The store lights felt too bright. The shelves felt too tall. The aisles felt too long, like corridors. On the muted TV, the anchor's mouth moved silently, speaking warnings Sophie couldn't hear. Sophie glanced at the clock again. 11:53 p.m. 7 minutes. The figure drifted toward the freezer section. Sophie saw them on the monitor, a dark shape against the glass doors, filled with frozen pizza and bags of peas. Then the figure stopped. On the CCTV feed, the person's head turned slowly toward the customer service desk, toward Sophie, and though the image was blurry, Sophie felt the moment like a hand on the back of her neck. They know I'm alone, she thought. The idea slid into her mind so smoothly it felt like it had always been there. Sophie's fingers pressed the edge of the panic button, but didn't push. Not yet. She didn't want to overreact. Overreacting was how you became the story everyone laughed about in the break room. Still, she did something small, something that made her feel less helpless. She reached for her phone beneath the counter and unlocked it. She opened her messages and typed to Jessa with shaking thumbs. "Are you awake? Can you call me? I have a weird customer." She didn't send it yet. The screen glowed too bright in the dim behind the counter. She turned it face down, heart pounding. In the silence, the building breathed. The figure moved again, this time toward the front. Not toward the desk, toward the doors. Sophie watched on the monitor as the person approached the entrance and stood there, just inside the glass. The door stayed shut now, sensing no movement outside. The figure lifted a hand and touched the small sign hanging from a suction cup. Open. Sophie's throat tightened. The person's fingers curled around the sign and, very deliberately, flipped it. Closed. Sophie stared, confused. It was almost midnight. Technically, she was about to close anyway. But the gesture felt performative, like an announcement, like drawing a curtain. Then the person reached for the lock. Sophie's brain stuttered. Customers didn't lock doors. She pushed back from the counter, so fast her chair squeaked. "Hey." The person turned, eyes glinting. With calm precision, they turned the deadbolt. Then the second lock. Then the metal latch at the bottom that slid into place with a heavy click. The sound echoed through the store. Sophie's body went cold. The person was between her and the only public exit now. Sophie's mouth opened, but no sound came out. It felt like her lungs had forgotten how. The hooded figure walked away from the door, steps measured, and headed toward the customer service desk. Sophie's hand found the panic button. She pressed it. Nothing happened. No alarm, no siren, no reassuring beep. Just silence. The figure kept coming. Sophie grabbed her phone and hit call on Jess's name without thinking. The phone rang once, twice. The figure reached the front of the counter. Sophie backed away, heart hammering, and the phone rang a third time. Then Jess's voicemail picked up. Sophie tried to speak, but her voice broke. She hung up. The hooded person leaned slightly, as if listening to the silence of the store. "You're alone," they said. It wasn't a question. Sophie's knees trembled. She tried to force words out, tried to push herself into action. I'm calling my manager," she lied, lifting her phone like a weapon. Her fingers fumbled, slipping on the glass screen. The person tilted their head. "Go ahead," they said. Sophie stared at them. The hood shadowed their face, but she could see the hint of a smile, thin and unpleasant, like the edge of a blade. Sophie's hands shook as she hit 911. The screen flashed, calling. No signal. Of course. The store was a dead zone half the time. She knew that. She complained about it. They shrugged. The hooded person watched her struggle with a patient interest. Sophie's mind raced. Back door, staff door, alley. Maybe it was unlocked. No, she'd locked it. Keys, the keys were on her belt loop. A jangling ring that suddenly felt like a lifeline. Sophie grabbed them and bolted from behind the counter, sprinting down the nearest aisle. The hooded person didn't chase immediately. They just turned their head and watched her run, like a cat watching a mouse make its first desperate dash. Sophie's shoes slapped the tile. Her breath tore in and out, loud and ragged. She reached the back hallway and nearly slipped, grabbing the wall. There, the staff door with the push bar. She jammed the key into the lock with shaking hands. It wouldn't go. She flipped it, tried again. The key slid in. She turned it, and the lock didn't give. Her stomach dropped. She tried again, harder, twisting until her knuckles whitened. The door didn't budge. For a second, her brain refused to understand. Then she saw it. A new metal bar across the door handle. A secondary lock. Something that hadn't been there earlier. Someone had installed it. No, impossible, too fast. Unless it had always been there, and she'd never noticed, because Jessa always handled the back. Sophie's throat tightened. Behind her, footsteps approached, unhurried. Click, click, click. Sophie spun and ran deeper into the back hall, toward the stockroom. The stockroom door was half open, spilling a thin line of light. Sophie slipped inside. The stockroom smelled like cardboard and plastic wrap. Tall stacks of boxes formed narrow passages. A pallet jack sat in one corner like a sleeping animal. The hum of the walk-in fridge vibrated through the floor. Sophie darted between stacks, trying to think. Hide, call for help. Find something, anything. She crouched behind a tower of paper towels and pressed her phone to her ear again. Trying 911, trying anything. No signal. A sob rose in her throat. She swallowed it down, tasting metal. The footsteps reached the stockroom door. Sophie held her breath, so hard her chest hurt. The door creaked open wider. Light spilled across the floor, stretching shadows long and thin. The hooded figure stepped inside. They didn't rush. They didn't shout. They didn't act like a person who feared being caught. They moved like someone in their own home. Sophie covered her mouth with her hand, trying to quiet her breathing. Her lungs burned. Her heartbeat pounded so loud she was sure it would give her away. The figure turned their heads slowly, listening. Then they reached up and pushed the hood back. Sophie saw the face more clearly now on the CCTV monitor in her mind. A young man, maybe late 20s, with neat dark hair and a calm expression that didn't belong in nightmares. He looked ordinary, like someone you might pass in the cereal aisle without a second thought. That ordinariness was the worst part. He took a step forward, and another, weaving between stacks of boxes. Sophie's eyes darted. If he came down her aisle of boxes, he'd see her. She crawled backward silently, shoes scraping just enough to make her flinch. She pressed herself into a narrow gap between pallets, the cardboard rough against her back. The man paused near a stack of bottled water. He reached into his jacket pocket. Sophie's stomach clenched. He pulled out a set of keys. Sophie's keys. Her breath caught. Had he lifted them from her belt without her noticing? When he leaned near the counter. When she ran. No, she grabbed them. Unless he had another set. Copies for the store. The thought made her head spin. If he had keys, he'd been planning. He'd been watching. He turned the keys in his fingers thoughtfully, then slid them back into his pocket. He spoke softly, almost conversationally. "You can make this easy," he said. "Or you can make it interesting." Sophie's mouth went dry. A small whimper tried to escape. She bit down on her lip until she tasted blood. The man's footsteps shifted. He moved further into the stockroom. Sophie's mind screamed, "Move now, while he's not looking." She slid sideways, inching toward a different aisle between boxes. Her hoodie caught on a corner of cardboard, and the sound, tiny, insignificant, felt like a gunshot in the silence. The man stopped. Sophie froze, every muscle locked. He turned his head slowly, eyes narrowing. Then he smiled. "Found you," he whispered. He moved fast then, suddenly, closing the distance with frightening speed. Sophie screamed and bolted, shoving past boxes, knocking a stack of chips to the floor. Bags burst open, scattering like pale leaves. She sprinted out of the stockroom into the back hallway and into the main store. The aisles stretched ahead, long and bright. She ran down them like corridors in a dream where you can't find the exit. The man's footsteps came behind her, steady and sure. Sophie's lungs burned. Her vision blurred at the edges. She headed for the front, toward the glass doors. Even though she knew they were locked, because panic made her stupid. She reached them and slammed into the handle, rattling the locks. They held. She turned, back pressed to glass, and saw him approaching down the aisle, face calm, as if he had all night. Sophie's eyes darted wildly. Something, anything. She grabbed a basket stand and threw it. It clattered harmlessly on the tile. She grabbed a display of gum and shoved it, sending packs skittering across the floor. He didn't flinch. Sophie's eyes fell on the narrow employee door behind the counter, the one that led to the manager's office and then to the back hall again. She sprinted behind the counter, yanked it open, and slammed it behind her. The office was cramped, smelling of stale coffee and printer ink. A cork board of schedules hung on the wall. The safe sat in the corner like a silent witness. Sophie locked the office door and pressed her back against it, shaking. For half a second, She allowed herself to believe she'd bought time. Then the door handle turned. Once, twice, then stopped. Silence. Sophie's breathing sounded huge in the tiny room. She forced herself to inhale slowly, trying to quiet it, trying to make herself smaller. She looked around desperately. There was no back exit here. Just the office, the small bathroom, the safe, the ceiling tiles. Her eyes snapped upward. A square ceiling tile, above the shelves of paperwork, sat slightly askew. Sophie didn't think. She dragged a chair beneath it, climbed up, and pushed the tile aside with trembling fingers. A dark space yawned above, dusty, filled with insulation and the skeletal lines of pipes and wires. Sophie hauled herself up, shoulders scraping, and pulled the tile back into place beneath her. She lay in the ceiling void, cheek pressed against gritty dust, trying not to cough. Her lungs begged for air. Her heart hammered so hard it felt like it might shake the tile loose. Below, the office door clicked. Unlocked. Sophie's blood turned to ice. She hadn't heard it unlock. She hadn't heard a key. She hadn't heard anything at all. The door opened. Light from the office spilled up through the thin cracks around the ceiling tile. Sophie squeezed her eyes shut, terrified her eyelashes would make noise. The man stepped into the office. Sophie could see him through a tiny gap. Just a sliver of his face, his shoulder, the top of his head as he looked around. He moved with irritating calm, as if he were browsing the contents of a drawer instead of hunting a living person. He opened the bathroom door, checked inside, closed it. He looked at the safe. He laughed softly, an amused exhale. Then he spoke, voice gentle. "I know you're scared," he said, as if talking to a child. "Everyone is. That's the point." Sophie's fingers curled into the insulation, gripping it like it could anchor her to the world. The man walked to the desk and picked up something. Sophie couldn't see what. He set it down again with a quiet tap. Then he tilted his head and listened. Sophie forced herself not to breathe. The silence stretched. Seconds dragged like hours. Then the man walked out of the office, leaving the door ajar. Sophie waited. 1 minute, 2. Her muscles screamed from holding still. Sweat cooled on her skin, making her shiver. She shifted slightly, and dust fell into her mouth. She swallowed grit, fighting the urge to cough. Finally, she dared to peek through the gap again. The office was empty. Sophie's mind raced. If she stayed here, he could just wait. If she moved, he might hear. If she tried the front doors again, useless. She needed a weapon, a way out, a way to call for help. Her eyes fell on the line of wires snaking through the ceiling. The store's security system, the cameras, the alarm. If she could reach the security panel in the office, maybe she could trigger something. She crawled carefully through the ceiling void, inch by inch, toward the spot above the office shelves, where she knew the alarm box was mounted on the wall. Her arms trembled with effort. Her hoodie snagged on a nail, and she froze, heart in her throat, then eased it free. Below, the store was quiet, too quiet. She reached the area above the panel and gently pushed aside another ceiling tile, lowering herself until her fingertips brushed the top of the box. The panel cover was screwed in place. Sophie swallowed panic. She didn't have a screwdriver. Her fingers found the edge of the cover. She pulled. It didn't move. She pulled harder. The cover shifted slightly, with a soft creak. Sophie winced, holding still. No footsteps. She eased it open. Inside were wires and a small red button labeled Alarm Test. Sophie's fingers hovered. If it worked, it would scream. It would alert someone. Or it would do nothing, like the panic button. But doing nothing meant dying slowly, alone, in a supermarket. She pressed it. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the store erupted. A siren wailed. Sharp, piercing, relentless. Strobe lights flashed red in the corners. The sound filled the building, bouncing off tile and glass, until it felt like the air itself was screaming. Sophie nearly sobbed with relief. Somewhere in the store, something crashed. Sophie froze. Footsteps pounded toward the office. Fast, angry. The office door slammed open, so hard it hit the wall. Sophie pulled herself back into the ceiling void, fumbling to replace the tile. Below, the man stood in the office, head tilted back, eyes scanning the ceiling. Even through the chaos of the alarm, Sophie could see his expression clearly. He was smiling. He raised his voice over the siren, sounding delighted. "Oh," he called, "good girl." Sophie's stomach turned. He stepped closer to the desk and reached for the chair Sophie had used. He dragged it under the ceiling tile and climbed onto it with slow, confident movements. Sophie scrambled backward in the ceiling space, pushing herself away with frantic hands. The insulation puffed dust in the air, making her cough silently. The man's fingers reached up and pushed the tile aside. Light flared in the dark void. For a split second, their eyes met. Sophie's breath hitched. The man's smile widened, warm and terrible. He reached in. Sophie kicked, thrashing, trying to push away. Her foot connected with his shoulder, and he grunted, momentarily losing balance. Sophie seized the moment and scrambled away, crawling fast through the ceiling. Her knees scraped on beams. Dust clogged her throat. The alarm screamed below like the world ending. She reached another ceiling tile near the back hallway and shoved it aside, dropping down. She hit the floor hard, stumbling, catching herself against the wall. The staff door with the extra bar still blocked her. The stockroom was behind her, the main store in front. She ran. She sprinted into the aisles as strobe lights flashed, painting everything in red, white, red, like a heartbeat. The siren still screamed, but muffled. Sophie darted behind the dairy refrigerators, where the aisle narrowed, and the glass doors reflected her panicked face. Her breathing came in harsh, wet pulls. She clamped a hand over her mouth trying to quiet it, trying to stop the sound of her fear. She crouched low, behind a display of milk crates. She listened. The alarm howled. The strobes flashed. In the gaps between the siren's peaks, she heard the faintest sound. Whistling. A simple tune, cheerful, wrong. It moved slowly through the aisles, weaving closer. Sophie squeezed her eyes shut, forcing herself to breathe silently through her nose. In, out. Her lungs didn't want to cooperate. Each breath felt like it scraped her throat raw. The whistling stopped. Silence, except for the siren. Sophie waited. Her muscles trembled. Her mind screamed, "Don't breathe. Don't move." Then, very softly, over the alarm, she heard his voice near the dairy aisle. "You can't hide from me in here," he said. "This is my favorite kind of place. So many corners, so many little rooms, so many things that belong to someone else." Sophie's eyes darted to the CCTV monitor screens near the front, barely visible from here. If the cameras were still running, he could see her. If they were down, maybe she had a chance. She needed to get to the phone in the office again, or to the landline behind the counter. The store's landline might still work, even if her cell didn't. She waited until the whistling started again, drifting away. Then she moved. She slid out from behind the milk crates and crept along the dairy aisle, keeping low. The strobe lights made everything jerk and jump in her vision. Her shadow flickered like a living thing. She reached the end of the aisle and peeked around. No sign of him. She sprinted for the front counter. Her shoes squeaked on tile. Immediately, the whistling stopped. Sophie's blood turned to ice. She reached the counter, grabbed the landline phone, and yanked it off the hook. No dial tone. She slammed it down and lifted it again. Still nothing. She wanted to scream. Then she saw it. The cord had been cut. Cleanly, like someone had snipped it with a tool. Sophie's stomach dropped. He'd planned this. He'd removed her options one by one, like pulling petals from a flower. She turned and ran behind the counter, toward the employee door again. The employee door was already open. Sophie stopped so abruptly, she nearly fell. The dark rectangle of the doorway looked like a mouth, and from within the office area, she heard his voice, close and amused. "Hello, Sophie." Her name. Sophie's mind went blank with terror. She backed away, shaking her head as if denial could change reality. How she tried. He stepped into view. He held her keys in one hand, the ring dangling. In the other hand, he held a small object that caught the strobe light, a utility blade. Not raised, not threatening, just present. Like a promise, he tilted his head. "You're on the schedule," he said, conversationally. "It's pinned right there." Sophie's eyes flicked to the cork board in the office beyond him. The schedule with her name written in neat marker. She'd never thought of it as information someone could use against her. He took a step forward. Sophie backed away, stumbling against the counter. Her hands searched behind her blindly, grabbing for anything. Her fingers closed on a heavy object. The handheld barcode scanner docked beside the register. She yanked it free and swung it like a club. The scanner connected with his forearm. He hissed, more annoyed than hurt. Sophie swung again. He caught her wrist mid-swing with startling speed. His grip was iron, cold. Sophie kicked, clawed, screamed. Her voice drowned by the alarm, swallowed by the store's screaming siren. He yanked her forward. Sophie's shoulder hit the counter edge, pain flaring. Her vision blurred with tears and flashing light. He leaned close, voice smooth and intimate. "Quiet," he said. "This isn't for them." Sophie's mind flashed to the news. The warnings, the calm anchor, the victims who had been found too late. No, no. She bit his hand. He jerked back with a sharp exhale. His expression flickered. Anger, then amusement again. Sophie ran. She bolted down aisle 5, knocking over a display of canned soup. Cans clattered, rolling, spinning like little metal eyes. She ran toward the back hall again, because she had no other path in her mind. She ran until her lungs felt shredded. She reached the stockroom door and yanked it open, slipping inside. It was darker now. The strobes didn't reach as strongly here. The sirens still wailed, but muffled. Sophie ducked behind stacks of boxes and pressed herself into a corner, shaking. She tried to stop her breathing from sounding like an animal. In, out, in, out. Her hands trembled so badly she couldn't control them. Footsteps entered the stockroom. Slow, patient. Sophie squeezed her eyes shut. A box shifted nearby. The man moved between stacks, using his hands to gently nudge cardboard aside, as if searching for a specific item on a shelf. He spoke softly, like someone sharing a secret. "They'll come because the alarm is loud," he said. "But this isn't the movies. They won't be fast enough." Sophie's throat tightened. She pressed her palm against her mouth until her jaw ached. The footsteps drew closer. Sophie's eyes darted to the pallet jack in the corner. Heavy metal wheels. If she could get to it, maybe she could. Her foot brushed a loose piece of plastic wrap. It crinkled. The footsteps stopped. Sophie didn't breathe. A shadow fell across her hiding spot. She looked up. He stood there, looking down at her. For a moment, his expression was almost tender, like disappointment. Then his hand reached out. Sophie thrashed, trying to crawl away. But he grabbed her by the hoodie and yanked her forward like she weighed nothing. Sophie screamed, the sound lost in the siren. He dragged her toward a metal support beam and forced her down, pinning her with his body weight. His movements were efficient, practiced. He pulled something from his pocket. Zip ties. Sophie fought, clawing, but he caught her wrists and tightened the plastic around them. The zip ties bit into her skin. Sophie's sobs came in broken gasps. "Please," she choked, not because she believed in mercy, but because her body didn't know what else to do. He leaned close. "I like when you ask. he murmured. Sophie's stomach turned. He pulled her upright and forced her toward the back hallway. Her feet stumbled. Her wrists ached. The siren still screamed. He shoved her into the hallway, toward the staff door. Sophie's mind spun. If he took her out the back? No, the back door was locked. The extra bar. Unless he had the key. Unless he had all the keys. He reached the staff door and, with maddening calm, unlocked the extra lock. The metal bar came away. Sophie's blood ran cold. He pushed the door open. The alley beyond was a black throat. Cold air rushed in, smelling of rain and rot. Sophie twisted violently, trying to pull free. Her shoes scraped. Her shoulder slammed into the door frame. He cursed softly and shoved her harder. Sophie stumbled into the alley. And in that moment, something changed. The siren inside still wailed, but here, outside, the night was wider. The sound didn't fill the universe anymore. It was just noise in the distance, and the alley had its own sounds. A car passing far away, a dog barking, a faint voice somewhere in the town. It wasn't silence. It wasn't sealed. Sophie's brain lit with desperate possibility. She hurled herself sideways, throwing her weight against a stack of trash bins. The bins toppled with a crash, spilling garbage. The man jerked back instinctively. Sophie bolted. Her wrists were tied, arms pinned awkwardly, but she ran anyway. Her shoes splashed through puddles. Her breath tore out in ragged bursts. Behind her, his footsteps pounded now, no longer patient. Sophie rounded the corner of the building and saw the street. Headlights, a car turning onto the road, approaching. Sophie screamed with everything she had, a raw, shredded sound. She threw herself toward the street, waving her bound hands. The car's headlights swung toward her. The driver braked hard. Tires squealed. Sophie stumbled into the light, blinded, sobbing, yelling incoherently. The driver's door opened. A man's voice shouted, "Hey, what?" Behind Sophie, the killer appeared at the corner, face composed, hands raised slightly as if in apology. "Sorry," he called to the driver, voice steady. "She's having a mental episode. She ran from the hospital." Sophie's mouth opened in disbelief. The driver hesitated, caught between her terror and the killer's calm. Sophie shook her head violently, tears streaming. "No, no, please help me." The killer took a slow step forward, still calm, still reasonable. "She's scared of men," he said, as if explaining an inconvenience. "If you come closer, she'll panic worse." Sophie tried to move toward the driver, but her feet tangled. She fell to her knees in the puddle, bound wrists scraping. The driver stood frozen, uncertain. The killer closed the distance with dreadful ease. Sophie screamed again. And then sirens. Not the store alarm. Real sirens. Police. The sound cut through the night like a blade. The killer's expression changed for the first time. An irritation, a flicker of something sharp. He glanced back toward the supermarket. Sophie sobbed with relief, so intense it hurt. He looked down at her, eyes cold. "This isn't over," he whispered. Then he turned and ran, fast, vanishing into the darkness between buildings. Sophie lay in the puddle, gasping, wrists burning, shaking so hard her teeth clicked. The driver rushed toward her now, fumbling for something to cut the ties. Oh my God, oh my God. Police cars arrived moments later, lights flashing, officers shouting commands. Hands cut the zip ties. Someone wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Someone asked her name, her address, if she'd been hurt. Sophie couldn't answer at first. She could only shake and breathe and stare toward the darkness where he'd disappeared. They searched. They didn't find him. They took her statement. They watched the CCTV footage. They found the cut landline cord, the flipped sign, the locked front door, the open staff door, the toppled bins in the alley. All the proof of what had happened. But proof didn't put him in handcuffs. Proof didn't stop the nightmares. Weeks passed. The news kept talking. Another victim. Another warning. Another blurred photo. Another line of police tape. Sophie didn't go back to work. She tried once. She stood outside the supermarket in daylight, staring at the glass doors with the open sign swinging gently. She saw her own reflection, and behind it, the rows of aisles like corridors. She couldn't step inside. Her life narrowed. She avoided small stores. She avoided being alone. She slept with lights on. Every hum of a refrigerator made her flinch. Every time someone touched a lock, her stomach lurched. Then, one cold evening in late February, Sophie got a call. They'd found him. Not because of Sophie. Not because of good police work. Because he'd made a mistake. He'd tried again. Different store. Different town. Same method. Watch, wait, isolate. But this time, the clerk had a working panic button, and the store had a back exit without a bar lock. This time, the clerk escaped into a busy street. This time, cameras caught the killer's face clearly. They had a name now, a history, a pattern. Sophie sat on her couch, hands shaking, and watched the news like she'd watched it on that TV in the corner of the supermarket. Only this time, the anchor spoke his name. The name didn't make him less monstrous. It made him more real. He was in custody, they said. He would be held. He would be tried. Sophie thought, it's over. She wanted to believe that. Then she heard the next sentence. Police are urging anyone with information, especially survivors, to come forward. Survivors. Sophie's mouth went dry. She was a survivor, and she knew something no one else knew. The calm patience, the way he spoke, the way he moved through aisles like he belonged there, the way he had said, "This isn't over." She couldn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak as it cooled. The building breathed, and in her mind, the supermarket breathed too. The next day, she went to the station. She told them everything. She expected to feel relief afterward. Closure, something. Instead, she felt hollow. Because speaking it made it real again. And because, deep down, she knew. Cages didn't erase what he'd done to her mind. The trial came months later. Sophie sat in a courtroom under harsh lights that reminded her of fluorescent bulbs. She watched him enter, shackled, wearing a suit. He looked smaller than she remembered. Ordinary. He glanced toward her and smiled faintly. Sophie's blood turned to ice. She stood to testify anyway. Her voice shook. Her hands trembled. She told them about the sign, the locks, the cut phone line, the ceiling tiles, the zip ties. She told them how it felt to be hunted in a place she'd once considered safe. When she finished, she sat down dizzy. The verdict came, guilty. The sentence came, long, heavy. A number of years that sounded like a promise. People congratulated her for being brave, for surviving, for helping. Sophie smiled politely, because that's what people wanted from survivors. Inside, she felt nothing but exhaustion. Years passed. Sophie moved away. She found a job in an office where she never had to be alone at night. She avoided true crime shows. She avoided late-night convenience stores. She avoided aisles that felt too long, too quiet. She learned to live with the scar that couldn't be seen. The knowledge that evil could wear an ordinary face and speak in a calm voice. Most nights she slept. Some nights she didn't. And every so often, she woke up gasping, convinced she heard a lock turning. One autumn evening, nearly a decade later, Sophie stood in a different supermarket. Larger, busier, brightly lit. She was there with a friend, laughing at something small and stupid, holding a basket of apples. A child ran past, squealing, and the automatic doors sighed open and shut as customers came and went. Sophie heard the sound of the open sign, tapping softly against the glass with each motion. Tap, tap, tap. For a moment, the world tilted. Her breath caught. Her fingers tightened on the basket handle until her knuckles whitened. Her friend glanced at her. "You okay?" Sophie forced air into her lungs. She nodded once, sharply. "I'm fine," she lied, because sometimes fine was the only way to keep moving. She looked toward the door. It was just a door, just glass, just a sign. But her body remembered. Her mind remembered. Trauma didn't vanish. It lived in the muscles, in the reflexes, in the way your breath changed when the world got quiet. Sophie turned away from the door and kept walking, step by step, through the bright aisles, refusing to let the memory stop her. Outside, night waited. Inside, the building breathed. And Sophie, still here, breathed too. If you made it to the end of this story, take a second before you click away. Check your locks. Check on your friends. Don't ignore that little instinct that tells you something is wrong, because the scariest monsters aren't the ones that look like monsters. They're the ones who look ordinary. Thanks for listening. If you want more slow burn horror, and suspense stories like this one, you know what to do. Leave a comment, share it with someone who loves being scared, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, good night, and don't stay alone too late.
Around a serial killer that was apprehended over a decade ago has escaped prison. Please stay vigilant.